Yeah, it is. This really is going to be a flight of a session, a journey for the next couple of hours. And we've tried to pitch this for people who know nothing about drones. This is certainly not a session for advanced droners, but you may well find you get a reminder of some of what you know, and some of the ways we use drones in this session is very much aimed at everybody. So we hope everybody takes away something from this. We are at 10:01. We're still being joined by lots of people, and so I'm just going to give this one more minute just to let everybody who's booked come into the space. It's being joined by Jeffrey. Welcome to everybody who's joined us. Some people with mics on, better to have them off until we communicate with each other. So welcome everybody to this session on drones. It's a wonderful, magical, strange, developing world. My name is Paul Levy, and I am an author. I'm based at a couple of universities doing research, the University of Brighton, the University of Warwick, actually in Warwick Business School. And I've been writing in this space for a while. I have a particular interest in AI, and particularly the philosophy of AI as well, though currently teaching myself Python a bit as well. So you're all very welcome to this session, and I'm just going to invite someone to join us in a moment, but he has a very unique way of doing that.
Stop it.
That's a very good heckle. Can I invite people to mute their microphones for the moment? Just checking to do that. I think you'll get muted if not. So welcome. And just before we start and before I introduce our session leader for this, could I ask people making use of that chat function at the bottom, well, chat communication function, it's reactions at the bottom right. I'm going to ask you to vote and then unvote essentially, because I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm going to ask another one, and then I'm just going to ask one more. And it's just in a way for our speaker also to get an idea of where you are in this. Can I ask you to just raise your hand, which is at the bottom right-hand corner, if you actually own a drone of any kind? If you own a drone, can you raise your hand? And that's under reactions at the bottom right-hand corner. Yeah, where it says reactions at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you can choose raise hand and lower hand. Can I ask everybody that's here to join in with this? We've got 4. So we've got a small kind of number, but most people here, according to this very unscientific poll, do not own drones at the moment. Okay, so just a second question. So can I ask you just to lower your hand for the moment? You all know how to do that. It's under reactions, bottom right. And my second question for you, and we're just sort of gathering this in, this I guess is a bit more of a challenging question. How many of you are currently using drones in any way for your business or commercially? Okay, again, please don't just sit back. It's good for us to get an indication here. How many people here use a drone in their business in any way commercially? I'm just looking here. We've currently got, and it's quite a minority again, we've got 3 different responses there saying yes. So we've got a lot of people here, I'm assuming, who are interested in that. And the aim of the workshop also is to encourage all of you to think about the businesses, the organizations, the ventures that you're involved in, and to think about what the possibilities might be around drones and how you might use them. Because the whole purpose of the next 2 sessions is really to, I guess, prod you, maybe with our drone, to say some of this can start to happen much quicker than you might think. And our presenter, Marcus, is going to show you how he actually has done that himself. So I'm going to hand over to our speaker. He's going to introduce himself in a very unique way. But I just want to remind everybody too that everybody here is in a position to ask questions at any time, to make comments, and we encourage you to use the chat, which is at the bottom, but we will also invite you where we can, where this fits in, to raise your hand as you've done if you've got a particular comment or a question, and we will also have time for some discussion that we will fit in as well. So this time hopefully is going to go very quickly. I'm going to hand over to you, Marcus Krebs.
Hi, Paul. I'm a little bit too busy, as you can see. I'm doing what I usually do. I'm taking my dog drone out in the park, and I'm hoping it is following me. You can actually see the algorithm tracking me. It's coming after me now. Lucky enough, I picked a very good day today, and it's telling me the battery is low. That's because it's a little bit cold, so it's likely going to go down in not long time, I suppose. Anyway, it's fantastic being here, opening up the course for MK College about... The tracking has stopped, but you still can hear me and you still can see me. About this drone course, crazy drones. I think the only thing that's crazy at the moment is really the times. We've got crazy time, and maybe a little bit to teachers as well. So Paul and myself will be talking you through turnkey solutions with drones and what you can do, particularly with a perspective from a business angle. So hopefully you're finding this interesting, and I better get the drone down now. You can see this also in a behind the scenes, which I'm going to make available, but hopefully it should be a great course, and I'll see you very soon.
Thanks for that, Marcus. Hopefully you're live in the room as well.
Yes, I am indeed. I just got literally back from the park, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you for this, as you said, unique course. Thank you for the introduction, Paul. My name is Marcus Krebs. I am a storyteller, a certified drone pilot, and also a, I guess, artificial intelligence researcher, if you like. Now, this course is unique in that it focuses on business use cases for budget-friendly turnkey drones and AI solutions. And in a normal world, and as I just told you in the park, it's a crazy world right now, but in a normal environment, we would have all welcomed you down to Milton Keynes College. We probably would have purchased a set of drones, and when I talk about drones, small ones, the kind of these ones that this course is about, and we would have given you the opportunity to get to understand them and do a lot of the things I will be demonstrating during this course throughout for you to explore and try yourselves. However, because that isn't possible, we thought about ways how we can most closely replicate that sort of classroom experience and give you an still immersive opportunity to learn about the drones, the things that are possible to using them and doing things with them, and at the same time getting an idea what it looks like behind the scenes, the kind of factors you need to take into account, the sort of externalities you have to be aware of. And in order to do this, I said this at the introduction, we are going to provide also 360 fully immersive behind the scenes videos that give you a real life idea what drone flying is about. So I can take you as closely as possible with me into my flying field whilst not being there. Now we're going to show you a selection of those throughout. At the end of this course, I will also introduce a companion website for you where all of these little clips will be available. So you get screenshots from the drone, from the actual app. You get recordings of the desktop activities that have been done, for instance, mapping out missions, particularly with focus on business and geospatial mapping. And then you also get the behind the scenes where I'm talking a little bit about the factors, what you need to take into account when flying, the sort of local regulations, certainly here in the UK. And I think later down the line, Paul has started already setting up something on spatial and in the metaverse, and I quite like that idea. So I might actually turn the behind the scenes 360 videos also into a spatial type of drones and AI course. So we addressing different kind of audiences with different ways and means to giving really an opportunity to learn and feel as much as possible what it is like, without necessarily being there, because still we are going through some crazy times, and it's simply not that easy because, you know, as you can see here, you need to have equipment. You need to be able to connect this to your smartphone, set the technology up, make sure everything works. So this one, for instance, is a very small drone. I'm also going to briefly talk about, you can probably see this here. This is a Tello drone. We're going to talk about small drones, budget friendly, and combining those in a way that you can use them for your business. And with that said, I think you get a pretty good idea what this is going to look like. At this point, it might be worthwhile asking, is there any questions in the chat for me, burning questions right now?
Not at this stage, but what I think I will add, and please do ask your questions, is that this session is very much my challenge to stop Marcus talking all the time, because he is so enthusiastic about this. So that's partly my role, is to ensure that, you know, this crazy enthusiast isn't too crazy today. The second thing is just to point out as well that in the future we are planning on being in fields in Milton Keynes. So if you're interested, stay in touch, and we are looking at doing a version of this, you know, in the physical world. And the third thing, which is really key for you to know, is the whole workshop has been designed around the fact that you do not need to be an AI expert to do this. And that's why we chose this workshop. So everybody here would be able to go down a learning curve that is not prohibitive, either budget-wise or expertise-wise, and start to do some of this. And part of what we'll be doing a bit later and in the afternoon session is to really start to target how you might use this technology in your own companies in almost any sector. There are possibilities here. Now, we've got one technical challenge, of course, which is around, optimizing for video, which you may need to do because that video is quite slow, Marcus. So we are sort of being challenged as usual by the tech, but we decided to give this a go anyway. And as Marcus has said, all of these videos and longer versions are going to be available on the website, which is free, that Marcus is going to share with you afterwards. So take us forward now, Marcus, into the first bit. Take us flying.
Yeah, so thanks, Paul. I think that was a very useful introduction, and your role, absolutely. You are my wingman here. You're my co-pilot. You my steward, and you're ultimately also there, literally the air traffic controller, making sure, you know, I'm not overstepping and going too far, because it's very easily done. And despite all of this AI that is being used, you can crash potentially with a drone.
And Marcus, just to remind you, I think what we're going to have to do, seeing the slowness of the internet, is make sure when you do show stuff, you optimize for video.
Yeah, I will do that. That will mean I have to stop share and then start share. We'll optimize for video and then stop sharing and sharing again, because I like to see my audience. And when I optimize for video, I cannot see you guys. Yeah. So thanks to all of you for joining me, and so for this sort of on and off. But if that helps in improving the flow, which I think yesterday when we done a trial run, it did, then I'm very happy to do that.
And I found it really interesting that you created a definition of drones, because the last time I had one I bought for my son, which he lost immediately quite a few years ago, and we bought another. So please nail down what the definition is here.
So one of the definitions I do go with, and we got to be mindful. Drones, I think, in a lot of people's minds have got a somewhat negative connotation, particularly, you know, if used for military purposes. So ultimately what drones are, they are often known or referred to as UAVs, and you will hear me referring through this course also as SUAVs. That stands for Small Unmanned Aerial Vehicles, which is essentially an aircraft that is controlled by a pilot from the ground, and increasingly, certainly over the last 2 to 3 years, autonomously controlled, either following a pre-programmed mission. And I will give you some examples throughout the first section of this course of waypoint missions and AI you can use to fly drones. I would call it semi-autonomously, because I'm still there as a pilot to oversee the operations, and or deploying artificial intelligence to augment pilot operations. So typically, if we take one of the drones that I've been using and been using quite a lot, we got the DJI Mini here, which is relatively small. That's the drone. It doesn't do all these things by itself. It still has got a controller, a transmitter that I control on the ground. But usually these transmitters have also got, these days certainly, mobile phones attached to them. And that means you can run certain apps on the mobile phone, either a third-party app or a native app from the drone manufacturer. Sorry, just touch my mouse. So that in a nutshell, I guess, is a definition of the SUAVs that we are going to use. There is certain distinctions within them. So for instance, and again, when we look at the evolution, you can see the typical drone or SUAV has got 4 propellers, 4 motors, but you could also use a fixed wing plane, a glider, a foam plane of some sort, or any other airfoil that is capable of flying, and you can attach elements to that and control these elements with a computer by using AI. The one that you see at the bottom is a Parrot drone that's been around for a while. It's actually quite good as well. Most of these use Wi-Fi to connect with the transmitter, so that has some operational limitations already. But the technology around those is improving greatly.
So
now,
just to be clear, so for example, my phone that I have here can download apps. Some might be very specific and some would enable me to use AI augmentation on the drone.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And the first video you saw me flying in the park was actually using a DJI Rise Tello, which was one of the smallest drones here. Isn't particularly great in terms of specifications. It's only got a 720p camera, but what it does very well is you can connect it directly to a smartphone. You don't need a transmitter for that. And you also can download third-party apps. And I used a third-party app with a very simple artificial intelligence algorithm that has drawn this green box around me and was told, follow this person in the park. And that's all the drone has been doing. So you bring it up in a position in the air, it hovers quite stably there. Then the camera picks up the person in the park, draws that little square around it, and then can follow you. Opposite, the battery runs out. It was cold when I filmed this sequence, so it doesn't last particularly long. But in principle, that is how third-party apps with artificial intelligence can be used. Now, the interesting question is, of course, and Milton Keynes' artificial intelligence community talks a lot about AI, but what actually is AI, and what is AI in the context of SUAV? So there's 2 elements to this. The first one, I guess that's quite small on your screen, and I don't want to go into detail, but if you take one of the well-known books from Stuart Russell and Peter Norvig, Artificial Intelligence, Modern Approach, artificial intelligence has been around for a good 70 years now, and there's different definitions in terms of what it can and cannot do. And the idea is that we have some kind of machine instrument robot that is capable of thinking like a human, thinking rationally, acting humanly, and also acting rationally. So it processes something, and then the processing drives actions. Now, at that point, I think, Paul, you explained this to me much better before. You've got a very good definition of artificial intelligence with 2 flavors, and maybe you can inspire our audience by bringing your wisdom to the table here as well.
Yeah, well, I can't even remember what I said at the time, but the thing that did come up from yesterday, I think, was actually I went back into my own memories of, owning actually a remote controlled little glider, then a remote controlled plane. But of course, the thing couldn't do anything without me. And so what it required was my intelligence. And you could have watched me in the park being very bad at it. My intelligence went down a learning curve. I became very good at flying it. Somebody else bought one. They weren't very good at flying it. And they came to a point where the thing would crash if it didn't have my intelligence applied to it. We're in a position now where that intelligence pretty much can be replicated and transferred into AI. So AI can fly the drone. And if I want to, I could leave it to automatically fly the drone without me there at all. But then there's also the possibility, and we're going to be covering this about how far it goes, is now being in a realm of that technology being artificial. You've all heard of things like machine learning and so on. It's possible for the augmentation of my intelligence to happen. And so what in this case, the app and the drone can do is not only do what I did, but it can start to do different things that I possibly can't do. And it can do things that I can do more accurately or faster or with more possibility, but it can also do things that I couldn't do with my current level of intelligence. And so we apply the word artificial to that, simply that I'm using the word human or natural, meaning me, which philosophically we could argue about. But so artificial is both the replication of my intelligence and potentially the augmentation or the improvement upon it.
Okay, thanks. I think that's a great summary. And along these lines as well, often when we talk about artificial intelligence, there's a reference to the Turing test, and Stuart Russell and Peter Novick explain that in the book. I don't know if you want to very quickly, for the audience, explain what a Turing test is in easily understandable language.
I think there's still a prize out, isn't there? The Turing Prize, that if anybody could create a form of artificial intelligence that could survive the test of a number of human beings not being able to tell the difference between the AI and normal human discourse, then they would win the money. And so far, no one's won the money.
Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see how far we get with that. But along these lines, what typical AI capabilities are required within a sort of Turing test environment is the ones listed at the bottom of the slide here. So it's natural language processing, knowledge representation, automated reasoning, machine learning, robotics, and computer vision. Now, I've highlighted the ones that I think are most applicable for SUAVs in blue here, and hence the SUAV in blue in the title. So natural language processing, you can get drones these days that are very simply capable to fly by giving spoken commands, basically start the engine, lift up, whatever. You give them certain commands and they will fly, similar to some modern, quite expensive cameras you can do these days. Automated reasoning, a lot of, well, not a lot, but increasingly, and one example of those is actually, I thought about this morning. This is an early drone, a relatively early, budget-friendly, out-of-the-box drone that came out, I think it was 2017, DJI Sparks. That included two interesting AI elements. It included gesture control, which means you could make certain gestures, like this one, for example, would mean take a picture. This one would mean take a video. And it would also include things like obstacle avoidance, very simple one. It's got a built-in sensor here. I don't know if you can see that, which is an infrared kind of sensor. And it was able to sense objects in front of the drone. Now, modern day drones, and the latest one that came out was the Autel Robotics Nano and Nano Plus. They have got vision sensors built in, not just at the front of the drone. They also got vision sensors at the bottom. You can see this one has. So basically, this is two simple cameras, and they can detect movement. And you can see actually in some of the behind drones footage when I'm in the flying field that I can land the drone, and when I put my hand here, it recognizes there is a hand, and it sort of slows down its motion. And as soon as it touches that point, it switches the engines off automatically. So that's automated reasoning. It's to some extent also, if you like, simple computer vision, because you can build pattern recognition into those drones and do certain things with it. And then, of course, it is a flying, tangible object. And you could argue, ultimately, drones, particularly if they're flying autonomously, are kind of robots as well. So there's robotic elements that come into this. Now, just
to mention, you mentioned a lot of names, and I guess we could share the links to how people can buy those and so on. But just to give us an idea, what the last drone you showed us, how much?
This one comes in it comes in different versions and different price bands. The cheapest version of this one, you're looking at about £260 at the moment. This is the DJI Mini 2. There's a lower grade version of this one, that's 250. If you buy that in a package, that's about £450 or £500 if you want 3 additional batteries, a bag, stuff like that. The Autel is about, I think, $800-900 at the moment. And then again, it depends how many batteries you want. It depends what size of the camera sensor you want to get. So whether you use this for videography and photography, and you want a bigger sensor that is more capable in lower light conditions, then you're paying for this more. Okay. The more things you add, the more expensive it gets. But I would argue all of this is affordable to some extent. And realistically, what you think about is it's a flying camera, basically. That's what the sort of out-of-the-box drone really is. But it's a 4K camera with really good flying capabilities. Yeah.
And I know we'll come on to this later, Marcus, but for those listening and watching, and we start to think about use cases, already when you've talked about the camera, I mean, a lot of people may have seen the fact that drones are used in movies and so on, but so any kind of promotional videos that are showing a building, but also an instructional video that might be showing safety, and you want to have an overhead shot of somebody behaving in a way that's not very safe, and wanting to then land the drone in a very particular way, very smoothly in a certain place. All of this becomes possible, probably more accurate, smoother than my hands are going to be on an iPhone.
It does. And I mean, the quality of those is astonishing. And also one thing we shouldn't forget, it's not just the camera. Most of these drones also have what is known as stabilized gimbal. That is partially software controlled. You also might get some electronic image stabilization being built in. And if you then combine the high spec features of the technology with the high spec features of the artificial intelligence that is possible, then you're really achieving outstanding results that you can easily use for business purpose. And maybe if we go to the next slide, just letting someone in. If we look at the evolution of these SUAVs and also a little bit my own evolution, you said already, Paul, you started off in with what are commonly known as foamies. So ignore me, but the focus is on the foamy, really. That is a very simple plane that's been out for years, basically. I think you said you were flying some in the 80s, and obviously they have developed over time. Initially, a lot of these were petrol power driven. Electromotors weren't really around, and even electromotors these days used to have so-called brushed motors. Now they are quite good, but they ran out at some point because they got little electrodes with carbon that are scraping along inside. All these modern drones that I'm using, and that would be my recommendation, whatever drone you're going for, go for brushless motor, because everything is with magnetics, but it doesn't touch itself inside. So there should in theory be no wear and tear in any of the drone motors, unless there's an electronic kind of some sort that overpowers it. But these old-fashioned ones, this is how I started off, and that's how many people started off with so-called foamies. Then my own journey was, I like these foamies, but they are quite big. I wanted to go a little bit smaller, and I also started modding, as I call it, with some of these planes. So you can see one here, that's a Radian UMX, probably my first sort of camera drone, if you like. So,
and what's modding?
Modding is taking things that don't come with the original item as you buy it out the box, and this is literally box how it comes, and you stick it to it. I mean, this is a very simple mod by taking a keychain camera, attaching it literally with a rubber band to the bottom of the plane, and then starting to record as you fly along. There is some flight footage on the Companion website to give you an idea. It's very shaky and you get a prop wash and everything else, but still you get a HD footage of something which otherwise you would have to hire a helicopter for 50K an hour, or you would have to hire a plane to do air footage with. And you can see I built a little cage here for the camera, so you get the angle right and you don't get the prop wash into the picture. So I started playing around with these. Then I very quickly moved into self-built drones. And when we talk about drones, I mentioned this early on. Basically, what you have an airframe, you have some motors, you have some electronic speed controllers, you have got a power distribution board, and you have got a little flight controller, which is basically a computer. Now, a lot of this stuff, particular development around flight controller electronics, and also some of these power distribution boards, has only been made possible over the last, I say, 6-7 years because of this thing, because of smartphones, mobile phones, and because of companies like Apple, Google, and all Samsung, the big developers, trying to cram as many sensors as possible into this kind of piece of technology. Obviously, for instance, in this case, you've got very small cameras here. You've got a gyroscope, you've got a compass, you've got GPS sensors, you've got all this kind of stuff that fits into a smartphone. Because of smartphone developments, people have then taken these sensors out and done their own thing and developed these kind of drones. And exactly what I did, I bought this stuff out of China. I got my solder iron out. I started putting these things together. So you can see a power distribution board, electronic speed controllers, then you can see the motors installed. I also started playing
Marcus,
around.
sorry to interrupt, just as well as time. So I'm just keeping an eye on time.
Yeah.
But you're scaring me off now. So I want you to move on to the drones where we don't have to do all this shit.
Good. Let's do that. So I played with wood, and there's some examples. I've done all this stuff. And because I couldn't be bothered with all of this, similar to you, Paul, because there's a lot of time and effort going into this, and you do crash these as well, because not everything works. I went into the turnkey solution space.
Now you've got me back now.
I got you back? Okay.
Yeah.
So now it's when it gets interesting. I showed this early on. So this is the DJI Spark. I've got my old one here. It's a bit like getting a vintage car out the garage these days. But this was actually the first out-of-the-box drone that used artificial intelligence for gesture control and for avoidance of obstacles. This is then in 2019, the Rastello, which was the first programmable drone. Now, despite this one being so small and quite low tech, what it came with is you can get this at an educational version. It comes with some floor pads and some patterns, and the drone actually can recognize these patterns on the bottom cameras that are built in. Well, literally here, you can probably see this. With these cameras, it can recognize patterns. You can program that with a graphical user interface that runs Python, and you can also program it in a way that if you've got more than one of those, you can actually do swarm behavior. There's some good YouTube videos out there where people have taught these drones to dance to certain patterns simply by using Python and some of the AI that is built into that drone as well. Then we come to the next one. This is Mavic Mini. That is a really important one and a big stepping stone in the development of drones. I've got my old one here. You can see, first of all, it's very small, folded. It isn't bigger than a mobile phone. And more importantly, the weight is below 250 grams. Now, keep that number in mind because we're going to come back to that. The reason for that is the regulation in 2020, and obviously the drone manufacturers knew this already coming, in 2020 and then 2021 changed, both in the UK, as well as in Europe, as well as in the US. So the regulatory authorities aligned themselves globally and said, it's okay for consumers to have drones, and we don't mind them going out shopping and buying this kind of stuff. But there should be certain rules. And one rule is around the usage of cameras. The other rule is around the usage of basically weight limits. So 250 grams, half a pack of sugar is the weight that the regulatory authorities globally set for these kind of consumer drones, if you want to be able to do as much as possible with these things, you can of course have a bigger drone, 2 kilos, 5 kilos, 25 kilos, but these things are rather big, rather expensive, and quite dangerous when they fall on your head or on property. So Paul, you want to say something, I think?
Well, so your proposition going forward is that these affordable consumer drones that can be programmable have use cases that small businesses could use.
Yes, absolutely. And
Okay.
this is the whole foundation for this course. And the reason I'm saying this is because the trajectory we are on is, we saw in 2019 DJI Mini, 2020 DJI Mini 2, that's this one. Again, a big stepping stone. It's again a sub 250 gram drone, but it has got 4K video, which is very important if you want to do high quality video, video footage. And there's now rumors came out, I think last week or over the weekend, DJI will likely bring out a DJI Mini 3 at some point in April this year. Again, that drone will be below 250 grams. I saw somewhere 248 or whatever. And it will this time include also obstacle avoidance and most likely additional AI functionality built into that. But this is where the trajectory is. And I know already from, I think it's 31st December this year, the regulations will change again. However, sub 250 gram drones are deemed legacy, a legacy class, and they will continue with that, with the same regulations that we have. So if you want to do as maximum as possible, within the regulations, certainly in the UK, Europe is slightly different. There will be a change, but I'm not going to touch that. Then what we should be looking at is we should be looking at this powerful pairing, out of the box, turnkey solutions, plus artificial intelligence apps, and that could be either built in from the manufacturer or third-party apps. And by doing that, you have got a very good, very feasible package that you could use for business. Now, there will always be specialized businesses that require a bigger drone because there need to be additional sensors on it, thermal imaging, LiDAR, whatever. And the small ones likely won't be able to carry that yet. However, I would argue for the majority of businesses, 80%, who could ever consider using drones within their commercial environment, this is a very powerful pairing. And, I mean, you can see it here. The reason is from a drone's perspective, they are very good. They're budget friendly, they're affordable, literally. And if you're a business and you got 10 people and you want to send them out with drones and you need 10 drones, you're looking at an investment of maybe £5,000 for all of them, but that also means you get 3 batteries for each of those and so on. So it's affordable for a business. And then that pairing by using smartphone AI apps and often also linked to some of the web interfaces that are out there is actually very, very powerful. It gives you maximum freedom. It's a modular approach, almost like taking Lego blocks and sticking them together. And you can build your own tailored SUAV and AI analytics toolbox to suit whatever business needs you've got. That is my proposition, and that is the foundation for this course. And I think this afternoon we will hear from other businesses who have made experience in that space and who are supporting this argument because it gives you maximum flexibility.
And just to throw in, Marcus, just because if everybody listening in, particularly if you run a small business, hopefully you're still interested and fascinated in this, but you're wondering, well, about how that, I can't see how I'd use that in my business. Even overnight, Marcus, having kind of looked at all the slides and so on and been thinking about this, I'm a consultant. I'm a one-man band consultant as part of what I do and a researcher. And I record videos all the time, video blogs. And actually you'll find on my website some very shaky videos of me holding my phone in front of me, recording hopefully some good content. And I quite like them and I get good feedback. But I've always wanted to make those better. And of course, one of these drones is going to be able to run ahead of me. I can walk, it'll change its camera angle. I can stop, it will stop. And I can make much higher quality videos that actually I was, being quoted for literally thousands for someone to follow me for just one video. And this becomes a really big part of my own, not just marketing, but content sharing and influencing. And it's got me very excited. And I would never have imagined that was possible even a few weeks ago.
I mean, we can see by your background, you live at the coast in Brighton, and just some of the philosophical pieces you're putting out there. You can either sit in your thinking shed, which I know you do often, or you could go out to the beach, could use the DJI Mini 2, could stick a Litchi app on there. Very recently, the drone manufacturer opened up the built-in software and allowed additional third-party softwares to plug onto that. And we have got an example later on how this could work with Litchi. You could walk along the coastline in Brighton if the weather is nice and it's not too windy, and we are in the UK. And you could set this up that the drone circles around you, could float away, you could fly it close, it would always focus on you. You could talk, and at the same time, you could be recording, obviously not with the drone, with a microphone, the audio, and then you could combine video footage with the audio, and you would get television quality, television advert quality, 4K footage from the drone. And if you then use some, editing suites or whatever to sex this up a little bit, then you really got something that it's a toolkit for you, for any one-man band. I'm a consultant as well in a way, and I do different things with these drones, and we come to some of these later, but there's plenty of opportunities. And all it's really, you don't even need to be able to fly this thing realistically, because the features built in the drone are, when you move the stick, it flies. When you stop the stick, it hovers in the air, locked in by GPS satellites. So, and these things are so good, they don't fly away normally. If you don't make Crave pilot hours, it's a flying camera. It's a flying TV camera.
Now, and I know that we're going into much more complex use cases in a little while, but I guess the reason I mentioned that, and I guess we can move on from here, is simply that what you're saying is the drones you're talking about now and the software and the apps and so on is the bit that has moved on from me having to control all that manually is AI.
Yeah, exactly. The flight becomes augmented by using that AI augmentation. It makes your life easier, and you can focus on the messaging, on the storytelling, and on the content. Let's so this is the pairing. Let's have a quick look at the fleets that are available. And at this precise point in time, I would only really recommend either the DJI Mini 2, and bearing in mind there's a DJI Mini 3 likely coming out in a few months' time. So if you can hold back, it might be worthwhile holding back. And you can see you asked about the price. There's some indication here. You get an idea about the flight times and the differences between those. I mean, this is all in the slides, and Alex and MK, I will send this to you after, so you can look this up yourself. If you want to play around with more indoor flying and some Python coding, then the Rise Tello is probably the one to go for. And also maybe if you got children and want to get them into drone flying, but purely from a business perspective, at the moment, this is as best as it gets at that price point. If you want more, of course you can have more, but then you're looking at really, double $1,000, £1,000 or upwards, and then it becomes rather expensive. Then in terms of hardware, most hardware is available either freely or as a freemium version. And the kind of hardware I'll be using throughout this course is a piece called Litchi, which I use to augment my flies and basically add capabilities that don't come with the native drone app that is provided by DJI. Then DroneLink is a very good tool to do flight automation and autonomous mission planning on a desktop PC. Then you load it through the app on the drone, hit the button, and again, there's some behind the scenes videos later as well, where you can see what this thing does. It just takes off, flies the pattern, takes the pictures in a predetermined pattern and fashion, and then comes back. WebODM is a tool that is used for geospatial mapping, and you're looking at about, I think the last I paid was $60 or £65, something like that. That's a one-off license, and then you just use it, and it's really, really powerful. And we only, certainly in this workshop and this afternoon, can only scrape the surface of what's capable with it. Then you also need some additional tools. Most of those are available on the iPhone, on the Google Play Store, and some are like Drone Assist air data, UAV, we come to operational conditions and measurements in one of the next slides. And then you also want to keep a particular, if you're a business, you want to keep flight logs, flight data, and make sure whenever you have a job, you also record what you did, where you flew, that you had acquired the relevant permissions in terms of no flight zones and so on. So that's all important. What I would say is always check with the drone manufacturers if you're in doubt. And there's some really good Facebook pages out there, some good forums out there where you can get additional information. But that is my toolkit. It's the hardware, which is these drones, DJI Mini 2 these days, really, and then software, which is what is there on the screen. As I said, there's others out there. So for instance, there's some mapping tools out there where you could pay £5,000, potentially £5,000 per year. Not necessary, depending on what you want to do. If you want to do specialist work, then you have to get specialist gear and you will be paying for that. But for the majority of cases, 80% of businesses, I would argue, this provides you with a lovely toolkit to get you really started. Okay. So let's come to the next session, or should we pause a little bit and ask if anyone has got any questions? Because I've done a lot of talking, so if you...
Can we open this up? I mean, there's a comment in the chat as well about, you know, the shock horror, the privacy issues about people flying over with drones and photographing you. And we'll acknowledge that at the moment and maybe discuss that a little bit later. But would anyone like to raise their hand? Do you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make so far, even just a reaction? You can just unmute yourself as well if you want to. I think everyone's fascinated at the moment, but anyone have a question, a comment? Okay, let's move on for the moment. I know there's a lot of information to take in, but hopefully you're with us.
Very happy to. And that brings me to the next session. So we're really talking about plug and fly. We're moving away from, yes, I did build this thing there. It's a wood drone. And there's some flying footage, and you can see there's a Tupperware sandwich box that houses the flight control, and you can see the same camera that I had on the glider on there. What I want to do now is, if you want to fly as a business, there are certain things you need to consider, both in terms of operations, in terms of the general workflow that you would be going through, but also very light touch regulations, laws, a little bit of weather methodology, and then also, I guess, operating principles, risk assessment, and insurance. Again, you get all these materials. There will be references for you to go back to, but that's really what I wanted to point out and keep in mind. So let's start with the workflow considerations. Normally, when you think about taking a drone out into the field, it's basically you get your bag, you get your drone out, and you literally like get the controller, stick the mobile phone on, have the drone, and try to get it up in the air. If you want to fly, particularly as a business, it isn't quite that easy, because what you should be doing is you should begin with the end in mind. And there's obviously different stages of a drone flying process. So it really depends what you do. And the question is right at the beginning, what are your objectives? And I'm not going to read all of these out because you get these as reference points, but are you going to do photo or video? Are you doing a mapping mission? Where are you going to fly? Then you need to think about the tools, so the hardware in terms of drones and maybe also sensors. And if you're flying at night, you need to have a strobe light attached to the drone to make sure you're meeting regulatory requirements. Software, in terms of, do you use the built-in native one, or do you use the one from a third party like Litchi or something else? You need to be aware where you're flying. First of all, at nationally, what are the regulations, but then also locally, is there an airport nearby? Are there any flight restriction zones, no fly zones? And by the way, people think you're not allowed to fly near an airport. Actually, you can, and I know people who have, but what you have to do is you have to contact the air traffic control tower, make them aware what you're going to do, give them your operator ID, other details. They will then give you a flight permission, similar as they would do this for a helicopter or for a plane. And once you got the flight permission, you can actually fly. So a no-flight zone doesn't mean you cannot ever fly. It just means you have to go through additional steps to get to the point where you can. You need to think about risk and mitigants, and you also need to think about allocation factors like weather, like data capture permission. So you mentioned there was something in the chat about taking pictures. I do pictures for my local park and with my park rangers, and they have recently opened an outdoor gym, which is great. And there's some footage, some basic marketing video on the companion website, what this looks like. And the rangers have now reached out to me and said, oh, we want you to come back because they're now also doing a kids playground and want me to film there. And I said, perfect, very happy to do that. But because of GDPR and data collection, it's for the rangers to get everyone's permission that people are happy that their pictures is taken, put on the council website, whatever. So they are dealing with that side. I don't usually deal with that, but I might have to consider it as part of my risk assessment. But you know, you need to be mindful of the surroundings, people, wildlife, building structures, and anything that could be endangered by doing this. Then, of course, you've got the in-flight, and the in-flight is really the sort of informed decision-making process in terms of what are you going to do? Are you flying completely manually? You can do that, but the footage likely doesn't look as good as if you would use a native app or third-party app to augment your flight with artificial intelligence. And then also you can decide whether you do, I don't want to say these are autonomous. If you use DroneLink for mapping mission, that's a semi-autonomous way of flying. I put at the bottom here tethered and fully autonomous. Fully autonomous, not really available in the, I guess, in the prosumer category, maybe something in commercial space, but you're looking at thousands of pounds of costs for something like this. We talk about flying a robot, and you probably need special operations permissions. Tethered, there is some drones that are being used around building structures for security purposes, which are basically sitting there waiting to go up, and they connected with a cable like a kite and maybe also a wire so they don't fly off. And basically you don't need to have batteries on the drone, and you can have a data link through the cable right down. And they use that, I think, in some oil platforms, some for prison security, for instance. But these are very specialist drones. We're not talking about them. Just keep them in mind as part of your workflow.
But I am aware that some small businesses, I mean, maybe because they're drone enthusiasts, but they are trying tethered for their own security as a kind of experiment. Particularly where you have a complex building and that you can't put cameras everywhere on the building. They are trying that stuff out.
They do. And I mean, you could argue, I don't know if you saw the video, some of you guys might have, but Amazon Ring came up in, I think it was last year. They were developing a Ring security drone for indoors, which isn't tethered with a cable, but it's kind of tethered with a base station. And the idea is it sits in a base station. If an alarm is triggered by the Ring alarm system, it takes off, flies around your property inside, and obviously it can go upstairs and so on as well. It just flies through the rooms, and it's got some sensoric built in. And once it's finished with whatever it does, it flies back to the base station and lands. So you got, that's kind of tethered without having a physical tethering mechanism. And there's a lot of development going on in this space, but this is really specialist. And then, of course, you need to think about post-flight. What do you want to do? So first of all, once the drone is up in the air, you should already do some in-quality control whilst flying. It's not the first time I've flown my drone, thought, oh, brilliant conditions, weather fantastic, lovely, you know, scenery, light, everything perfect. You get the drone back down, you just want to check and make sure, and you forgot to put the SD card in, for instance, or you forgot to hit the video recording button. That's pretty annoying because you might not get these conditions back, particularly if you talk about sunrise, sunset, whatever. So time-dependent things. Once it's done, you know, you need to get it down. You need to think about the mapping mission. You need to think about the kind of footage you're capturing, whether you want to capture in JPEG, that's a picture format, or in RAW, which contains much more information about and allows you much more post-flight editing. That's very important. Then you need to think about AI processing. So some of the geospatial mapping examples we're going to see in a little while, it's actually important that this is set up properly, because these pictures need to overlap. If they don't overlap, you will end up with gaps in your maps and in a 3D model. And there's an example as well. And then, of course, you need to think about distribution and storage. So are you just putting a HD video on YouTube, or do you have a client who wants to get a delivery of 4K full video on a USB stick?
Yeah.
All these things are important, but the reason that arrow is at the bottom here as well, you need to begin with the end in mind, and the end in mind determines both pre-flight and in-flight workflow considerations.
And just to mention, I guess, to underline this, in case this scares everybody off that this looks like a huge amount of work, this is a learning curve. And you need to get this right the first time. As with any investment in a piece of technology, I mean, they're called missions, and you could replace that with projects. And projects need pre-planning. They need to be, run at the best quality possible, and you need to make sure that the project closes down and it has an aftermath. And so once you go down the learning curve of this, these missions can become more standardized. You can innovate around them. But just like you would do with any other piece of technology, despite the cheapness of the drones, is any project needs to pay attention to these things in all of its different ways. So you don't just go out into the field and let the drone go and then improvise. Just like any business process, we need to get this right, and it needs the planning to do well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it becomes almost like a ritual. And so a quick example, we haven't got time this afternoon to talk about that in detail, but I interviewed this lady who uses consumer drones like those ones, a little bit bigger, in the Galapagos Islands for conservation project. And they take aerial pictures, and then they use a Zooniverse citizen science project where you can identify these. Now, she said, if you are flying, well, if you're going to coastline in the Galapagos archipelago, and sometimes it takes 5 hours by boat to get there, it's really annoying if you haven't charged your batteries, if you haven't got your SD card. And they developed almost a religious ritual. And they haven't got just 1 or 2 batteries. They've got like 40 or 50 batteries on board, because one battery is half an hour. And if you go out for a whole day, data mission capturing, you need all these batteries to support you to do that. So it becomes embedded in your processes. And if you do that as business, then you would write most likely a desktop guide or some sort of operational procedure that allows you to follow these. And I'll give you an example of a risk assessment template in a minute. Very quickly, I don't want to go into detail into this, because we covered a lot of this already early on. But once again, here's this figure: sub 250 drone racks. This is really the only operational envelope we are flying in, because we're using these sort of below 250 gram drones. There's other regulations for drones that are weighing more, but that also means you're reducing your flexibility, and naturally you're reducing your safety.
But the key point is you need to know the regs. They don't stop you flying. Like in any field, there are risks, and you need to make sure you are legal. And so part of this will be just to stay up to date, just as you do if you're driving a vehicle or doing anything else that has risk around
Absolutely. You need a driver's license to drive a car. You need a drone, potentially need a drone license to drone certificate to fly a drone.
Just before you move on, just for a very quick audience takeover, can I just take the gamble? Can I bring in Shailesh? You're over in Milton Keynes. Shailesh, can you put your camera and microphone on? Are you there?
You might have scared him now.
It might have scarpered. Okay, let's just try. I'm just trying to bring a couple of our guests in. How about Paulette? Are you there?
Yes, I am.
What? Just any reactions so far, Paulette? Any questions, reactions?
Yeah, unfortunately, my previous meeting overran and I've only joined about the last 10 minutes. But
Okay, that's fine.
one of the reasons I joined because it looked like an interesting topic, and the little bit I've heard so far is being very good. I missed a large chunk, almost an hour.
Yeah.
So ask me that question this afternoon. I'll be able to give you a much more informed opinion.
That's fine. Let's go over to Jeffrey. Jeffrey Kolish, are you there? Are you there, Jeffrey?
Yeah, here now.
Just there you are. So just any thoughts, questions, comments so far?
It's very in depth. The slides, the conversation that you're both having together is a bit to and froing, and obviously you're very well adapted or knowledgeable about the subject matter. Yeah. I find that by reading the slides and listening to you, I can actually get more out of it.
Yeah. But, do you have any questions for Marcus so far? Okay, thanks so far. Okay, let's take that further then. Marcus, over to you.
Yeah, I'm mindful that we do have some demonstrations, and I'd love to show them to you if the technology works. So back to some of the operational factors. Because you have a drone and you get it up into the air and it's exposed to weather, you need to be, and this is part of some of the certification regimes as well, you need to be aware of meteorology and other factors for SUAV operations. Again, I'm not going to read all of this to you, but there is good apps out there. So for instance, this is UAV Forecast. That's a picture I took 2-3 weeks ago when Storm Eunice was battering the UK badly. And you can see here, gusts up to 105 kilometers an hour. Funny enough, I saw a YouTube video this morning of some crazy guy who put his drone up in the storm, and unsurprisingly, the drone was blown away. But whilst it was blown away, and he didn't find it anymore, sadly, but whilst it was blown away, he obviously recorded the flight data live, and you can see on the screen, it flew more than 100 miles per hour. And I mean, this thing, because it is so light, if it's up 120 meters in the air, it just gets blown away. But you need to be aware of wind speeds. You need to be aware of vegetation, forests, how high you're flying, because typically when you fly a drone up high in the sky, up to 120 meters, 400 feet, the winds are quite different than they are on the ground. So sometimes I go out, I can't feel anything on the ground, but I still can recognize there's some wind up there. Now, most of these modern drones, again, this is where the AI kicks in beautifully, and this augmentation of the flying, it will tell you if there's a problem. So if it recognizes there's too high wind speeds and it actually needs to power the motors up to fight that wind speed, and it, of course, the inbuilt flight computer measures that in two ways. It measures how far do the motors go to actually achieve a certain direction and speed, but it also can measure, within milliseconds and compare the location where it was a second ago to the location where it is now. Basically the drift and from the GPS coordinates can work out what's happening. So the drones these days really give you an augmented flying. Again, if the battery goes low, you can set all these things and can tell you batteries are running out. But you need to be aware also of the number of available satellites. Recently in the UK, which is unusual, up to Norfolk, we've seen the Aurora Borealis, Northern Lights, and that means there's increased magnetic disturbance. And if that's the case, you would see this on an app like this as well. So KP1 is very low, but KP5, 6 we've seen over the last few weeks, and that can impact how the drone flies, both because of the built-in sensors. So drones have got a magnetometer, a compass built in, but they also got a gyroscope built in and others. You need to be aware of nearby pilots, other drones, planes, no flight zones. And thirdly, and not less important, maybe the most important one, not a lot of people talk about this, you also need to be mindful of your own state of mind if you're a drone pilot, because ultimately, if anything goes wrong, you are responsible for this thing. And you can see that there's a regulation that came out last year. Basically, you need to have an operator ID displayed on the drone, similar to a number plate on a car. So if the drone crashes and causes damage, people will be able to track me through the Civil Aviation Authority, and I might get potentially banned or fined or what else. Now, in order to manage all of this sufficiently, particularly if you're a business, and bearing in mind I use the drone part leisure, part recreational, but also for business purposes, you need to do often, or even clients will require you often to undertake a risk assessment and get sufficient insurance. Now, when you undertake one of these risk assessments, this is traditional risk management methodology, really. But what you're looking at is you're looking at the severity of these risks and the likelihood of these risks. So if it happens, how bad is it? And how likely is it going to happen in the first place? Certainly uncertainty. You need to focus really on ground hazards, what's going on around you whilst you getting the drone up and down into the air. And also, is there nature reserve? Is there buildings nearby, cars nearby, traffic, whatever? But you also need to be aware of airborne hazards and anything that's up there. That could be power lines, for instance, which are awful often, even with a 4K camera and live video feed on the drone, they are sometimes quite difficult to see, particularly if the light conditions aren't perfect. So if you've got sun lines, sun glare, it makes it difficult. You need to be aware of technical failure and malfunction. If the drone disconnects, what's going to happen? Most drones, again, this is AI built-in augmented flying. Most drones have so-called return to home RTH features. And that means if the connection between the transmitter and the drone is lost, it decides whatever you told it beforehand to do. So you could be telling it, if you lose the connection and you're at 20 meters, please fly up to 50 meters first, because there's a forest around me, and then fly back to where I let you take off in the first instance. You also might tell the drone, actually, there's too many hazards around there. If I lose connection at any point in time, just hang there and hover. Bearing in mind the drone has got 30 minutes battery life, you might be able to go back and retrieve it and get it down manually. So you could walk closer to it, reinstigate connection with it and get it back down. But it's important that you set these parameters before you fly, because once you lose the connection, it's too late. And the drone looks on its flight controller chip, what is stored, whatever parameters are stored in there, and applies them autonomously, and then does what you told it to do. So once you know all these hazards, you need to score them. You determine what the risk is initially without applying any mitigants. Then you need to determine what mitigants you can apply. You rescore the whole thing and use this is basically an Excel template to assess the ultimate risks. And once you've done that, you also need to have mission-specific insurance requirements. Now, if you're flying a drone commercially in the UK, you need to have a commercial drone insurance in place. That could either be annually, or you can actually get drone insurance now on an app. And you can purchase that on an hourly basis or half a day or day basis, whatever. It's almost pay as you fly insurance, but you need to have all of this in place. And with that said, I think these are all the operational features that we should be focusing on.
Yeah, we're quite keen to go. We want to go flying if you can.
We do. We want to go flying. Any more questions from anyone at this point?
I think we're getting feedback saying people are really fascinated. Some people love just looking at the slides, and that creates a little bit of a difficulty because we've got a lot to cover as well. And we do want to cover some of the key stuff here. So
okay,
time to get going, Marcus.
You know what? Why don't we fly? So very quick as an introduction, you can use AI, artificial intelligence, to augment your flights. You can do that with the built-in native app, and you can also use third-party apps. Now, the built-in native app usually works quite well for static objects. I'll go to the workflow here. So native app, in that case, DJI Fly is called. It's simple, it's reliable, and it allows you to do static object tracking, but it doesn't allow you to do dynamic object person tracking. And for that, we're going to use Litchi. So what's the difference? I think it's probably best explained with an actual, flying field. So what I'm doing is I'll stop this here and I'll share it again. but are shared, optimized for video and take with me in the flying field. And hopefully that works. Paul, any problems, please do ping me, and enjoy that session. It's self-explanatory. I might stop it in between and we can have a little chat about it and continue. But this is using the DJI native app to do AI augmented flying in the field. Enjoy.
Okay, so welcome to the AI augmented drone flying. I've got this building here. I did show you this earlier. I want to fly around that. So what I'll do is, you can see what's happening on the screen. I get the drone up first. That should happen right now. So the drone is up. I will focus on the building. I get the behind the scenes camera a little bit closer. You can see what's happening on the screen here. The seagull is probably not too impressed, but we should be fine. I'm now going into my AI mode, and the AI mode I'm going to use is a so-called quick shot. I will use a circle quick shot for this one. I should be high enough, so I shouldn't have any issues here. Go on quick shot. I have to select what I want to do. Obviously I have to drag a box around this. I've just done that, and let's start and see what happens. Let's start the recording. You can see the seagulls flying around here. So this is a fully AI augmented drone shot. The idea is to do a marketing video. What I might be able to do is get the drone a little bit higher. Actually, it stopped. So let me do that again, because there is a, you can see this. I want to be sure I'm safe. I'll do this again. Start. It's counting down. And whilst the drone does what it does, I can of course follow it on the controller. The shot itself shouldn't take particularly long. You can see it's counting down here. The percentages, you can see we're going past the windmill. That should give us a nice shot. Just have to make sure we stay clear enough of the trees, because there are some trees in the way. And also we got the seagulls checking out what we're doing. At all times I have to fly according to the rules, and the rules suggest we have to fly with a line of sight. So at any point in time that I'm standing here, I can actually see the drone. The light conditions are also very good. And the drone is now doing what it's doing. It's just completing its circle. We are at 53%, so halfway around. It's continuing, and it does this all automatically by using AI. So I haven't got my fingers on any of the sticks. You could see early on when I intervened. That was when I stopped the drone doing what it's doing. And it's almost back to the starting position over there. We got 99% left, and that's it. It should be done. So that was the built-in functionality in the native drone app.
So I'm going to stop this here, and I'm asking if you have any questions. And I'm also inclined probably to jump to the next session, because this second part of the video is a so-called drone flight pattern, which basically means it goes up and goes back at the same time, which means you get greater view. But the principle is exactly the same. So we're using AI to mark up a section or a building or a structure, and then the AI controls the drone in terms of flying that predetermined pattern around that. Unless anyone is insisting that I'll show this part, I'm very happy to go to the next one. I just want to check with you that you know, you don't feel like I'm taking stuff away from
No,
you.
so I'm just noticing in the chat, Antonio's given some really interesting use cases because we're just going around a building, but there are so many other possibilities for this. And of course, if you have a big product, you could have a much closer circle video showing you all the sides of the product. I've seen it used in safety testing as well. So there's all kinds of possibilities here.
Okay, in that case, I jump to the next one. I leave the sharing on the way.
I'm going to go a little bit closer to this
sensor. And I will show you now, in contrast to what we just saw. So we used the DJI Fly app, which is the native app. Now I'm using a third-party app, which is called Litchi. And it gives you an idea, because in that case, I'm walking through the park and the thing is following me around. And that sort of reminds me of what you said earlier on, Paul. You could do the same, of course, along the coastline and record one of your philosophical video blogs, but you should be getting a good idea.
This is an example of an AI augmented drone mission. It probably will be fairly briefly because the wind is picking up now, and we'll see if we get wind warnings on the screen. But you can see what I'm doing. So I'm taking the drone in the air. The behind the scenes video is available for you too. I won't bring it up too high. I bring it back a little bit. So what I want it to do is I want it to focus on me and actually track me, ideally, by using the AI and by then following me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select myself. It should already be set from aircraft position. It's heading, got the elevation. I think that's all good. Let's start this. Flight mode should be set to normal. We've done this. Okay, please ensure there's no obstacles about. It's doing this now. It's actually going up. And let's see if it is following me. It's turned around, it's heading a little bit. And now that I'm moving, let's see what the drone is actually doing. So you can see it's staying up there. It's keeping an eye on me. It obviously knows from the controller position where I currently am. And also it's got the GPS signal. Probably can hear on the behind the scenes video, possibly also on the recording from my microphone, that the wind is picking up. I haven't got it too high. It's up at 15 meters at the moment and about 15 meters away from me. I could get it down if I wanted to. Actually, no, I can't. So it's staying there at the moment, and it's doing all of this actually with an AI augmentation. It will realize, hopefully, that I'm moving. It's fighting the wind a little bit. So you get an idea of this follow functionality. I'll stop this now. The next one I'd like to do also briefly is the focus mode. So that was the orbit mode. The focus mode. And again, let's check the settings. So it's focusing on the mobile device. This time I can control the actual drone. Let's change the picture for the screen so you can see. It is following me, but at the same time it is also focusing on me. So if I move it a little bit about, it should turn and it should fly around me. So all it does is focusing on me. I probably can bring it a little bit up. There will be some trees in the way. And you can probably see the trees on the footage as well. It is still following me. The tree doesn't seem to deter it too much for the simple reason I've got the mobile device set as a point of reference, and by doing that it's just focusing on me, and obviously it also would record pretty good footage. I'm bringing it in a little bit for the simple reason it is quite windy, And I'm bringing it down a little bit as well. And you can see it's still following me, probably a little bit too close. But it definitely knows where I am. And I hope that gave you a good idea of a brief example of AI augmented flying with a third-party app. I'm going to stop this now.
So I'm going to stop the sharing at this point and go back to a shared one without the optimization, so I get to see you. I think at this point, the last clip in particularly, you've seen two different modes from a third-party app, and the interesting observation, I guess, is in the first mode I used, which was the follow mode, I haven't really got much control over the drone. I give it predetermined parameters in terms of distance for me and height, and the AI simply makes sure it keeps that. And you can either do that by focusing on a person while using the algorithm, or in this case, I use the GPS coordinates of the transmitters. The second example was the focus mode, which is an interesting one because the focus mode really only controls the built-in camera of the drone as well as the gimbal, and it turns the camera in the way that it focuses on an object, but I'm still somewhat in control how close or how far I want that drone to be away. Now, this Litchi app does offer quite a good selection of different fly modes, and those in itself actually take some time to understand and learn, and really going out in the field and playing around with, because what you don't see is you don't see the blooper tape here, but this was my second or third attempt to actually getting this working. So it takes a little bit time to get your head around. Also, before you come in, Paul, what I wanted to say is, because you have a screen recording of what I can see on my device whilst flying, you get a pretty good idea of the sort of telemetry and the real-time information you're getting, whether that's in terms of the video stream, any warning messages. You saw a warning message popping up there, warning me about strong winds. And there's all sorts of features that you again need to educate yourself and learn, but don't let that stop you from picking up a drone and getting third-party apps and playing around with it, because none of this is what I would call programming. None of this is software developing. You're actually using that as a consumer. And these things are very, very powerful and pretty reliable as well. So over to you, Paul.
Yeah, so just a quick question about, for people listening again, what would you say very roughly from being a beginner to getting to that place, buying a drone, downloading the third-party app? What's the sort of learning curve? Is it hours? Is it days? Is it weeks?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah, a question. What would your estimate be for an average person?
So first of all, I would recommend you taking a model line stepped approach. The first one is you get the drone, you get the native app, you play around with it, you learn all the functionality or the base functionalities and the features as well. In order to do that, you're probably looking realistically at a weekend, right? I mean, I see so many times on some of the drone Facebook groups where people say, oh, I went out to Argos or Kais or whatever, Amazon, I got my first drone, set it up, flew it, and you look at the footage and yeah, that looks pretty good. So getting it up and flying it, because there's so much built-in safety features and AI, is pretty straightforward. Then finding the right way of deploying it for your business, identifying niches, that's a little bit different, and that will take you more time. And of course, there's companies out there in the UK as elsewhere as well. I think we've got someone from a drone academy on our attendees today who are teaching people to doing that, and then also customizing how they're using these tools that is available to them for their specific business purpose. It takes time. So I've flown, I think last time I checked, almost 200 kilometers by drone now. And I can't remember how many flying hours I've got behind me, but there's a lot, right? You spend a lot of time in the field or with the client or simply doing it. If you're a roofer and you want to use the drone to do roofing surveys, you probably wouldn't go out too much to start playing around with it. You just go to the roof where you normally go, and then you decide if you have to get the ladder off your van and go up the roof, or if it might be sometimes easier, just go in the back garden, get the drone up in the air, let it fly across the roof, take some pictures and then or video footage, and then decide how good that is. And every time you do that, you are training. It's something you learn like anything else, riding a bike, driving a car, whatever it is. It's not difficult. Anyone can do it. You don't need computational skills. You don't need software development skills. You don't need AI skills. What you probably need is you need to have some sort of sensory awareness what's going on around you, because whilst I'm standing here and flying the drone, I still can hear what's, behind me, next to me. You need to be aware if there's a helicopter coming, if the wind is picking up. I find it quite enlightening going out, because whilst I'm using high tech here, it actually helps me to reconnect to nature. Normally I wouldn't look out the window necessarily and say, okay, it's sunny today. What do the cloud patterns look like? Would they indicate to me it's going to rain or it's going to snow? And when you're in the field, you develop a sense on the wind of your skin, whether there's a storm on the way. I can't describe it, but you need to align with the technology, but at the same time, you need to align with the natural environment you're deploying that technology in. And that's the fascinating part about it. It integrates us more rather than taking us out of the equation. That's my experience. But yeah, it takes a little bit of time, like with anything.
I just want to throw open a question to everybody here then. Some of you said that you were using drones commercially. So again, I'll just invite you to put your microphone on. So we're very informal here, or you can type in the chat. But can you give us any examples of how you're using drones in this way? Anybody want to come in on that? Just throwing this open to everybody. What use cases can you think of in using drones in this way? Anybody? I know some of you said you use drones, so can I just bring in somebody? So I've got a big silence there. Just checking if people are just being shy.
Hi, Paul. It's
yeah.
Paulette here.
Go ahead,
No,
Paulette.
it is not shine.
We'll start with Paulette, and then we'll go to, is it Mohammed next, I think. So Paulette.
The area that I'm really interested in is data connectivity. When I joined the webinar, it was just on the tail end of Marcus when he was talking about referring to using data cards. With the way technology is nowadays, it's more advantageous to be able to stream the data. That way you don't have to rely on data cards. So that's the area of interest for me, because I can see it opening up to other areas, especially in logistics.
Marcus, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, a couple of comments. So certainly with these consumer drones, the way they set up is they have a built-in SD card. They record on that card for the simple reason 4K footage normally takes up a lot of space, and you need fast cards to be able to record that without any stuttering or any jello effects or anything like that. At the same time, though, the drone, depending on how you set it up, you can ask the drone to record, or the app it comes with, to record the footage cached in your smartphone in a lower resolution. Now, I know there is some sort of niche social media influencers, vloggers out there, I would call them. They actually have used, and you can use some of these drones to do live video streaming on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, maybe not TikTok, So that capability is certainly there, and bearing in mind the transmission, so the protocol between these latest drones, the DJI Mini, and the transmitter, the manufacturer calls that OcuSync, and that's OcuSync 2 at the moment. The new version I've heard in April is supposed to come out with OcuSync 3. Now that sounds all really exciting, but what it is, it's really using 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi signal with 5.6 gigahertz Wi-Fi signal combined, and it scans through the frequencies really quickly. It identifies the strongest bandwidths and the stronger bands and channels, and then jumps onto these, latches onto these. So it uses some kind of algorithm to identify the best wavelength and the best bands in real time to bring a live video feed through. As you just saw on the video demonstration, what I recorded here is a live video feed from my mobile phone screen, as I can see it, as what the drone is seeing. But of course, what you can do is you can also record live video and you could stream it. Now, the other day, I reached out to a company in the US I've come across with, and that's probably more for the second part of this workshop, but they're called Skybrowse. They use drone footage for safe and search and rescue missions. For instance, firefighters, if they have a building that is currently burning and they want to identify certain nests within the building where there's particular heat coming from, or maybe identify some victims, some cooler spots, some issues in the building. Previously, it was quite difficult to analyze that live footage. Skybrowse now, they say, I think you need a maximum 2-minute video, and you could do 4K video, and you could do that as a live stream, run it then through their cloud servers and their AI software, and the feed that's coming back won't be live then, but it'd be as close as to live as possible, will show you the thermal imaging features of that building or that accident site on fire. But it allows you to get a 3D model, and I'm going to show you in one of the next demonstrations what a 3D model based on pictures taken with the drone looks like. They have a different approach. They use live video streaming, then to run it through a model. Obviously, you need 5G, you need fast internet connection, all these additional factors that augment what you want to do, but the technology certainly is there, and the technology is developing rapidly in this space as well. I hope that answers your question, Paulette.
Yeah, thank you. We've got one other question, I think. Was that Mohammed who came in second? No? Anyone else? So Marcus, just to throw in also, I mean, just in terms of the research into this area, even just these two things, I'm thinking of the first one, the circling, is definitely being used in tree management and tree surgery, where there are high trees and you just need to circle at the top to assess the health of a tree, to see how trees look in a particular field and where you need to plant and prune and so on. And in your second one, the follow one, there's lots of evidence around now. It's being used in warehouse management. And it's also factory efficiency, following a particular set of products which are marked a bit like a person around a factory to see where the flow is, and that kind of view enables factory redesign. And they're also using the drones, as I mentioned, with warehouse management in their ability to read barcodes.
We see a company briefly mentioned, and there's a sort of promotional video this afternoon when we talk about business applications, where they use drones to fly along conveyor belts in a factory and identify if there's any issues. For instance, parcel delivery, sometimes these parcels get jammed within the conveyor belt, and the drone can just inside the building fly along on a mapping mission, a predetermined flight path. So you can send that same drone up every half an hour if you wanted to, just fly along the conveyor belts. And then you could use built-in AI to say, there's two parcels and there should be 10 centimeters distance between them. They are together for whatever reason. That can detect that and then alert them for problems. So yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but the sky is the limit here.
Yeah, Marcus, we're into the last 25 minutes, and I know you wanted to show us one more, iteration of this. So let's take that forward.
I do, and
Going to bring the drone over.
what I wanted to briefly talk about is autonomous flights. Now, remember, we talked about AI augmented flying, where I'm in control, but the AI is doing certain things to make my control of the drone better. I've got 3 demonstrations here that all link together, and the idea is when we go to the workflow again, the workflow considerations. For a mapping mission, the idea is I need to first map out what I want to do. Then I need to take the programmed map waypoint mission I have developed to the drone, into the field, fly it, and then I can feed that data back on the desktop into my model to do some geospatial modeling. So I'm going to show you, well, first of all, I'm going to stop this and I share this with Optimized. So hopefully this works. So the first part is how can I map a mission on my desktop PC before I go into the field and plan basically beforehand. This, I might cut this down again a little bit, mindful of time, but we see how we go.
What I would like to show you now is a tool that I use quite regularly to automate drone missions. The tool is called DroneLink. You can see it here. It consists of a web-based application. We're going in there in a minute, and I'll show you how this works, what you can do in terms of planning and simulating. And then it also consists of a smartphone app that sits on your controller when you go into the field to execute that mission. The beauty of that is you can pre-plan everything on a desktop computer or a laptop if you like, and once you've done that you can play around with that. So probably best shown how this works. Let's go in here. You need to have an account, and depending on what sort of level you want, you could be a hobbyist or you could upgrade that. You've seen some of my previous locations and missions, but let's go in here. I want to start afresh for this course. So what I do is I say create. It knows based on the location where I am already. And I say now I'd like to start a new map to set a flight pattern within certain boundaries. When I do this, it asks me to select a location for this new map plan. And I know this building here very well, and you might have seen this on some of the teaser videos and some of the other videos I've shared for some of the previous sessions with you. So I'm going to go on here and say, yeah, let's start roughly from here, because then to be exact, I use this tree. It then goes in and starts mapping out what it thinks I would like to do. Now, I don't want it exact that, because that's far too big. And I'll show you in a minute why that would be. So I have to go a little bit in, so I can make this map, first of all, a bit smaller. I can then move it or center it over the location here. We'll bring this down a little bit so you see. So this is the building that I've got in mind, and I make this even smaller. Once we start, we need to select a few parameters, not many to be honest, but one of them is the drone, and I think I'm likely going to fly either the Mini or the Mini 2. Let's select the Mini. I think I can use the same map also for the Mini if I wanted to. In terms of altitude, I'm going a little bit down. So 60 meters are too high. I tend to say probably 40 meters. Overlap is important because if you imagine the drone is taking the camera and is taking a series of pictures, how many of those you can see in a minute, because we can simulate that and get an idea from a mission preview perspective how many pictures actually this will require. Now I know from the mapping software that we're going to use later, once we harvested these pictures, that ideally there should be a front overlap of at least 85% and a side overlap probably of around 80% or so. So I'm going to change this. As I change this, you can see the software automatically recalculates the flight path to give you an idea what this looks like. Speed, I'm not going to adjust at all. I'm not going to touch any of this here. It will take a picture every 2 seconds, so it doesn't take particularly long. And once I've done this, I'm going to save that or say just done. And then I will do a mission estimate, because ideally I'd like to get to about 25 pictures. The reason for that is, once again, WebODM or Web Open Drone Map does require quite a bit of computational resources, and also it does a lot of calculations in the cloud. The more pictures you have, the more likely it's going to be that this doesn't work as well as you would want it to. So in order to do that, I have to make this a little bit smaller. And if you think about it, all I want to do is really, I want to achieve coverage of the building here. Now I can do that by moving this a bit about. I have to make it bigger first, then you have to move it, change the center. You can turn it, all of that, to be honest, doesn't really matter. You don't have to have an exact square. So I adjust it a little bit, just to get the coverage for the building. And let's see how many pictures we're ending up with now. 30. So a little bit smaller. Ideally I want to get, yeah, perfect. So that's 24 pictures. I'm quite happy with that. And what I then also can do is I can actually do a mission preview, so I get an idea what this would look like in the field. Now it's generating. This shouldn't take particularly long, but it's, you know, it's quite clever how it does this. First of all, I move this a little bit around so you get an idea. This would be the takeoff point. This whole area here would be the approach. This is obviously the map area, and you can see already it's computed the geospatial representation within the field. If I play this now, you could see here the drone would have taken off. This is at the moment the viewing angle and the view that the drone would actually see. As it flies up here, and you can see it's still in the approach. I can actually bring that a little bit forward, so you can see it's coming to the approach. As it comes here, the drone will then automatically move the camera down in a 90-degree angle, because the reason for that is it will start actually taking individual pictures, all these 24 pictures we just talked about, and you can see that here at the bottom. As I go on those, you would see this popping up. So the drone has now turned the camera down. Obviously this is still in simulation. It would fly along this path. This would be the visual area that the drone would see at a height of 40 meters flying over the building. You can see it's simulated here. All it does is, whilst this flies along autonomously without any intervention from me, it would be taking these pictures. It would be storing the pictures in the drone's internal memory or on a SD card. And once it's finished, it just stops here and hovers in the air. You can see actually how it's turning. I would get sufficient coverage of all these pictures. And I remember earlier on when we had to select this, we had to say, you know, how much overlap do we want to get? And I think I put 85% and 80%. So this determines how much each of these pictures is overlapping as they are taken. And once that is completed, we have actually managed to harvest some aerial data. In that case, high quality pictures, and these pictures can then be stitched together in the Web Open Drone Map application to do geospatial models of this whole area. So
Okay, so I think you get a good idea how I would be going about planning a flight mission to generate some, harvest some data for maps, for instance. And now that we've done that on the desktop, I actually would like to take you to the flying field,
hopefully,
and give you an idea what
Just
that
gives you-
really looks like. So the same mission that I just showed you that was planned on a desktop, I'm going to give you a very brief demo now of an autonomous flight using the DJI Mini 2 and DroneLink and loading that mission and then going through that. Before I start, any burning questions from you, Paul? We're good on time at the moment, aren't we still?
Yeah, I think we've got about 15 minutes. So again, just thinking about use cases and so on, geospatial mapping is probably a very big area, but insurance companies are using this, aren't they?
Yep, they do. They fly in insurance sites and take pictures like that. It's so much easier to do an assessment on the desk based on Google Maps once you've got all the coordinates and then go out into the field. And also, it kind of means you don't really need fully trained pilots, because if you've got someone who can switch the drone on, load the mission onto the drone and then just fly it and collect it back, that's all that's required. And you know, let's go here and let's give you an impression.
Attempt to map a building for geospatial mapping, and we're doing this by using DroneLink for autonomous flying. Here's the app. You can see it on the screen. I'm bringing up the Discovery Center program for the flight path. I'm starting up the drone and then moving out the way a little bit. You can see on the behind the scenes video that the drone is doing all of this autonomously without any of my interventions. I'm keeping an eye on it a little bit for the simple reason the wind is picking up a bit. It's okay, because the drone will give me a warning if it discovers any issues. You can see it's on the way now. It's approaching the center. As it does that, it turns, the camera is turning down now, is starting to take the first picture, the second picture, the third picture, and so on. It should be pretty quick. You can see it's calculating this through, and as it does this, it records these high definition pictures onto a SD card. Once I'm going into the SD card at home, I can load those into the geospatial mapping app. And whilst I'm doing this, I can model either three-dimensional geospatial models or ortho maps and combine all this footage together. You can probably see high up there at the moment, the drone is flying on the predetermined flight path. You can see the picture it's taken, and it continues to take off the center on the screen here. Once it's done with what it's doing, it should be coming back. If it doesn't come back, I will be able to manually intervene the flying session and bring it back manually. So you can see it's got now 10 seconds left, a few more pictures. Let's see what it does once it's completed. It's just hanging in the air at the moment. One more picture probably. And that is it. So the mission is accomplished. I can remove this and I can simply bring it back manually. You can probably see me on the screen in a minute. I am bringing it down and I'm bringing a little bit forward. And somewhere, here I am. Let's bring it back to the camera.
So you've seen how simple that is. Once you've planned that mission within DroneLink and you simply loaded it into the third-party app onto the drone, you go out in the field. It's almost like playing a movie on a phone. It does this all by itself. As I said, there are already behind-the-scenes videos on the companion website, and I actually hold the controller away from me into the camera. So you can see I'm not doing anything. The drone is doing all of this by itself. Whilst it does this, it records the data, basically 24 pictures. And once we've done that and recorded those, the last will step in this particular workflow of a geospatial mapping mission will go into WebODM Open Drone Map. It's an application that is based on your desktop PC, but it uses heavily cloud traffic. Now, Paul and I tried this yesterday to see if we could do a live demonstration. Unfortunately, that wouldn't work because Zoom is taking up the bandwidth. So what I did is I recorded a brief session of what I do with the data and how I generate the maps within WebODM. and how you then can generate 2, 3-dimensional maps and other things. This is really just scraping the surface, but it shows you what is possible right now with a fairly budget-friendly toolkit and out-of-the-box solution. So, Paul, any questions for me here, or should
No,
I
I
start?
can't. I can't wait to see this because we couldn't watch it properly yesterday.
I know. Okay, let's give it a go. See if that works. Okay, so let's just assume we have been outside. We've been flying the drone by using DroneLink to do a autonomous flight mission. In that case, we took 24 pictures of this building structure here that is known as a Discovery Center. What we then can do is we can go to WebODM, that stands for Open Drone Maps. We can load the pictures into the application and determine what kind of map we would like to generate. And once we've done that and everything works well, because a lot of the processing of these pictures and the modeling, AI modeling, actually happens in the cloud, we can go and open the map and see what happens. It'll take a little while. WebODM usually opens the map up initially as a 2D picture. And here it is. So if I scroll out a little bit, you can probably see where we are. And you can also see that this is actually overlaying the photos we've taken earlier with the drone via DroneLink onto Google Maps. So initially, we will end up with a 2D model, ortho photo, basically 24 individual pictures that have now been stitched together. What we also can do is we can look at the surface model, and the surface model actually uses an AI algorithm tool to apply a layer and look at the different height distribution here. I usually like the chat one better. And maybe use the extruded shading. Again, once we change this, it'll just take a little while to regenerate the picture. And you can see the elevated areas of the roof are in lighter colors. The ground area surrounding this is in darker colors. We can also change, for instance, the opacity and make it more transparent so that the underlying Google map actually is shining through. Interestingly, yeah, so let's go back here and let's switch to the 3D model of this particular area. Now, this usually takes a little while, and I might speed that process up a bit. Okay, so here we are. That is our model stitched together in WebODM, and it's still, you can see it's still generating the picture based on little tiles, if you like. So that is our model based on 24 pictures taken straight down. We could start, for instance, now and overlay this with the cameras or the positions of the drone. As those pictures were taken, they should appear in a minute at the top. So you can see here is the cameras. I take them back out. We could go to a textured model and load that. Again, that'll take a little time, and I will speed this process up for you. Here we are. If we then want to do the appearance, for instance, we can overlay this with boxes, so you get a better idea of the three-dimensional nature of this, well, really what it is now, a geospatial model. We can take that away. And then some interesting features here I wanted to show you that are very, very simple and otherwise could be quite difficult. So for instance, we could undertake a height measurement. If I go to the top area of the roof here, select this and go to the bottom of the corner here, and you can also angle this just to make sure that we are actually straight up, and select this, and it would tell me the area here. So the height of this roof of the building is 8 meters 63. We also can do distance measurements, for instance. So I could say, okay, roughly here's the corner of the building. If I go to here where the patio area is starting and where's the coffee shop, tea room, then I can see it's 15.5 meters. It's also possible to do volume measurements, for instance. It's possible to do angular measurements, circle measurements, and area measurements. Area measurements we can probably have a look when we do the bio corner, because that gives us a better idea on the two-dimensional model, 2D model. But that is all possible, and if we want to remove that, we can do that simply by removing all these measurements. Okay, so in light of where we are from a time point of view, I think it's our model list. Oops, if I stop this and go
just a quick question, Marcus. We've got a quick question from Henry in the chat. How accurate would the measurements be from the 3D model of 24 pictures?
The accuracy really depends on, well, a lot of factors actually. It depends on the GPS sensors. It also depends how accurate actually the Google image is, because we are working off a Google map originally. And then, okay, if we do the 3D model, that doesn't rely on the Google imaging because it's just hanging in the air there. It really depends on the angle of the cameras, on the quality of the cameras, on the height when this is taken. Accuracy would be similar to, I guess, a normal GPS accuracy, and that's anything, I guess, between 50 centimeters and a meter normally. Sometimes, depending on how many satellites you get closer to that. But it's pretty good for, you know, it's not for micro incisions in the ground necessarily. You need other instruments to doing that. But for building surveys, structural surveys, getting an understanding of geospatial distribution, it's, you know, it's good. I mean, you can see here what is doable, and I'd say within a meter normally you're probably okay.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of this first part. In the second part this afternoon, I would say fly higher, but also dive deeper. We're going to look at some use cases of this, you know, so particularly, again, if you're interested in a bit more detail, Marcus is going to share a couple of use cases, show us a bit more about drones. If you attend both of these sessions and you're prepared to fill out it's quite a short questionnaire, but to help you reflect and share your reflections with us, you can get a course completion certificate. So please do look at that possibility as well. Please do write in the chat any feedback you've got on this session before we close, but I wanted to leave just 3 or 4 minutes for anyone that wants to put their microphones on. If you've got any particular comments or questions for Marcus as well, be as specific as you like. So we will share the slides with you. The video will be available. We've shared the LinkedIn group. Please do go over to our study group for this session as well. Any final comments in the chat? We look forward hopefully to seeing you this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you in a real field when that allows as well, but hopefully you'll join us at 2 o'clock. So I'm bringing this to a close now. We'll stop the recording, and please do stay just for a couple of minutes if you've got any final questions. Thanks for now.
I think the AI just said goodbye.
Yes, making some strange noises there. If anyone would like to put their microphone on informally now, please do. It'd be lovely to hear from you now. If we could just, it's felt a little bit formal with so much to show, but please, anyone, do chat to us. Don't make us feel too lonely.
And if no one says anything, just to let you know, in the slides, there's a references page. And the first one on the top is a It's a course companion site, essentially, are put
Oh yeah,
together.
we've got to say that.
That is live now. It's got all the videos on there. It's got more videos on there. It's got sample videos on there. It's got marketing videos on there. I've done some sort of commercial videos as well. It's got the full interviews of some of the businesses I interviewed for this course, and more on this afternoon. So don't watch it yet, please. It's also got the full interview with the iguanas from above project from the Galapagos Islands.
Really?
Some of this was partially featured in Planet Earth 2, and also in Martin Clune's ITV documentary, it was part 3, Galapagos Islands. They're using drones there for some forestry analysis and conservation projects. So there's plenty of materials, all bite-sized, but also longer interviews if you wanted to. I'm still adding some content and I'm still describing some of the videos, but I think the majority of stuff is there. And of course, if you want, if you need anything, if you've got any questions, you know where you can find me, mostly LinkedIn. You can find me in the MKAI WhatsApp group, and obviously you can reach out to Paul as well as Richard and others. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me for something which is quite different, I guess, to the normal courses you're probably used to. And as Paul said, any feedback welcome. If you fill in the feedback form, then you'll get a course certification in return for that.
Well, we're at 12. We're heading off to an MKAI team meeting. We never stop here. Thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you this afternoon. I shall bring this meeting to a close. Thanks, Marcus. Great effort.
Thanks all.